Well, let's speak now to Conservative MP for Wyre Forest, Mark Garnier. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the programme. Are you sitting and watching this sort of pantomime of policy, if you will, where something that voters were promised, well, 3 prime ministers ago is still nowhere near happening?
Well, we're getting there. Although I have to confess, I am slightly surprised that we're not doing it on Monday. I was actually meant to be in Vietnam on a trade mission, which we cancelled at the last minute in order to try to deal with this Rwanda issue. But look, whether it comes back on Monday or on the 15th, actually, when I think it sort of gets moving, it's going to get moving pretty quickly. The way it's going to work is, if you look at the House of Commons, those amendments went through with majorities of 70 in order to block Lord's amendments. It went back to the House of Lords. Their majorities would drop to about 30 to 55. When it comes back to us, we're going to get it through pretty quickly again. Then we have this issue of, are the Lords going to try and block it another time? And we'll have to wait and see. But inevitably, if they block it again, the elected lower chamber ultimately has the whip hand on all this, because we can invoke the Parliament Act and push it through. So it's kind of annoying and it's irritating, but it doesn't stop it necessarily getting through. I think most people would agree that the weight of the argument is with the House of Commons, and with a pretty consistent majority of 70 behind the government business, this is going to go through.
The other thing about it, Mark, is that it's quite shocking, I think, to the people of Britain. For better or for worse, we have an elected government, a Tory government, who have this policy, and they represent the people. They represent the majority, and they want to get this policy through. And by the way, I think a lot of people in this country would like to see the Rwanda scheme up and running. So we have to go through this ping-pong process. Which just seems to be delay. All these Labour lords, these Lib Dem lords and these virtue-signalling independents say, no, we're not delaying things. We're just trying to put a proper check on this legislation. That's not true. They are trying to delay it. They're trying to undermine it. They're trying to say that the basic premise that Rwanda is safe is wrong. They're trying to screw this legislation up. And as you say, in the end, after this ping-pong that we'll have to, in the end, watch for about 2 months, aghast, the Commons can turn around and say, listen, we're the elected government and we're going to do it. That seems to be a strange way to go about business.
It is. I mean, I'm, sort of fairly sanguine about the Lords in general. At the end of the day, there are an awful lot of very clever people in there who've had lifetimes working in certain areas in international law or in kind of sport or whatever it happens to be. And they do bring an expertise where sometimes they do have a look at what we're putting out of the House of Commons. And as an amending House, they actually do come up with some good ideas. We sometimes we screw up. It's not impossible, and they can be quite useful in this. But the other side of this is that they do know, and this is sort of quite a complicated point, but they do know that they are in existence because the House of Commons, to a certain extent, allows them to be. And there are, we will always have an upper chamber, but we may change the upper chamber to something else. If you continually get this problem, it comes up every now and again. And if you remember, Tony Blair was quite keen to change the House of Lords, to remove all the hereditary Lords as a system now, which is slightly different. But ultimately, if they keep pushing back, if they keep going against the elected lower chamber, eventually you end up with a sort of constitutional standoff. And we all know that an unelected chamber can't hold back the elected will of the House of Commons. But we don't want to get to that point, which is why we have the Parliament Act, where we can kind of push it back. But my guess would be that when we'll reject the Lords amendments on the 15th. It'll go back, hopefully that night, if not the next day, and then they'll vote it through, or they won't challenge it. If they do challenge it, then we have this constitutional standoff, and the Parliament Act is invoked, and it just looks terrible.
It does, yeah.
Stay there for a moment, Mark. So I just want to bring this back into the sharp focus of the effect this is having politically in this country, and speak to you, Alicia, about the YouGov polling out today, which shows the Conservatives dropping to 19%. That's a staggeringly low level for an incumbent government. But I think most importantly here, you're seeing their main challenger on the right, Reform UK, up at 15%, putting 4 4% between them, if one imagines that most of those votes going to Reform are coming from Conservative voters, it only needs a 2% shift in that polling for the establishment right-wing party to be level pegging with a party that about a year ago was on 5%. It really is a remarkable narrative, and I would say fuelled in part by the big issue of immigration.
It's really interesting because I think maybe a year ago or even less than that, to be honest, if you'd said that we'd been in this situation with the polls, people would have been really surprised. I mean, Reform kind of came slightly out of nowhere, if you don't mind me saying that, Alex.
Not out of nowhere for me.
But they really just had this quite dramatic rise. I think at the beginning, when they kind of started to creep up, people thought, yes, they'll exist. They might be a small threat to the Conservatives. But now what we're really seeing is that threat is growing. I mean, we even heard that the mayoral candidate in, I think it was Manchester today, the Conservative mayoral candidate has defected to Reform as well this morning. So there's definitely a bit of a shift there. I mean, whether this translates into seats, that is a bit of a different question. Obviously, you've got one MP at the moment. You've got Lee Anderson, who recently defected to Reform. That's not necessarily to say that the polling will translate across to the amount of MPs that will be in Parliament, but it definitely means that they might take some seats from the Conservatives.
I think, let's throw that back to Mark, because it may not translate necessarily into first-past-the-post system into Reform bums on benches, although I'd say with potential defections that could well change, but it will potentially translate into far fewer Conservative bums on benches, won't it, Mark?
I think it could do. If we go back to the example of the 2015 general election, UKIP, I think, got 3.94 million votes. So they got an awful lot of votes, but not a single member of Parliament, if I remember correctly.
One member of Parliament.
Sorry, say again?
We got one. UKIP got one. Douglas Carswell, yeah.
Yeah, but that wasn't the election, was it?
Yeah.
It wasn't the general election.
It was the general election. He won his seat in the by-election. And he won his seat again in the general election.
Well, are you still cracking the champagne about that, are you?
I just know the facts. I was
well
there.
Done. We're one MP. Yes.
I was there, so I'm just saying what the facts were.
She sets the bar low for triumph.
Well, first past
carry on, Mark.
what can I say?
I humbly stand corrected. But the important point was that I think everybody agrees that there were a number of Conservative MPs who weren't elected, or candidates who weren't elected, because there was quite a lot, over 4 million of those UKIP votes, and inevitably, you're always going to see some votes going to be coming away from Conservatives to go to Reform. But look, I would say, whilst we accept that the majority of the Reform voters might well otherwise have been Conservative voters, there are quite a lot of Reform voters who are people who wouldn't have voted otherwise if Reform weren't there, or some people who tend to vote for kind of neither of the two major parties. So I've seen people who've defected from Green to UKIP, for example, and you could easily see people defecting from Green to Reform. But I have to confess that the majority are going to come.
That'd be quite a defection, wouldn't it? Saying going from the Green Party to get rid of net zero. I mean, that's a Damascene prophecy, if ever I've heard. Damascene conversion.
I wish a lot of members of the Green Party would undergo that process. Can I ask you, Mark, to get back to this ping pong? As I say, my mates in the pub, they're looking at this and they're going, what the hell is going on? More and more, we see these debates about language and what you can and cannot say, and people are seeing the Westminster bubble as more and more insular, more and more as a sort of legal debating society that isn't really connected to the real world. Now, Vernon Coker, who's obviously got skin in the game, now a peer, former Labour minister, of course, he stood up today and said, the government's accusing us, Labour lords, Lib Dem lords, of deliberately delaying the Rwanda bill. He said, I was all set to debate this next Monday and Tuesday, and yet the government comes back and says we won't be debating that until after Easter. So can you explain why it is the government doesn't want the Lords to pick up this issue right away on Monday and Tuesday, but in fact wants them to delay it until after Easter? What is in that for Rishi and the gang? I don't get it.
Neither do I, if I'm being entirely honest with you. As I say, I was set to go to Vietnam on a trade mission, leading a delegation in order to try to promote British trade in Vietnam, and I was due to fly out on Tuesday afternoon, and that was cancelled because of this Rwanda thing coming back. So I'm as surprised as Vernon is. I don't know. I mean, it may be that what we will get is, rather than necessarily hanging around over the break, because if it hadn't got to conclusion by Tuesday night, we wouldn't have. Parliament is breaking up, and we would we would have had to have stayed behind, and which is not an unreasonable proposition actually, but we probably should have done. But if you come back on the 15th, you can get it done. Everybody's going to be around, everybody's back. You can get it done pretty quickly. That's the only reasoning I can think of. But as I say, we are as surprised on us at our end.
Interesting.
Do you believe the Prime Minister when he says, yep, the flight's definitely going to take off in June? I mean, we've heard that before, haven't we?
Yes, I do. I mean, look, the point about the Prime Minister, he's incredibly keen to get it. As you know, I tend to be on the sort of the more centrist end of the party, but even at our end of the party, we're 100% committed to this policy for the simple reason that we can't think of any other way of breaking the business model of these appalling people smuggling gangs. And this is what we've got to do. There are, irrespective of what you say about immigration, and we all want to have legal, formal, proper immigration for whatever reason. What we don't want to see is women and children dying in the Channel at the hands of the people smugglers. And whoever you are, you want to do that. I mean, even if you're the most kind of left-wing encourager of sort of, everything that is woke in this world, even you wouldn't want to see that happening. And we would have to come together in order to try to resolve this. So I think we are, working forward to get this done. We've got the good incentive. We've also have done some policies, don't forget. The Albanian returns agreement has seen a 90% drop in Albanians coming across. So there has been some measures which have worked. It's just, how do you deal with the people smugglers, and by destroying their business model, that's how we're going to resolve this.
Just a last question, Mark. Do you agree with the Prime Minister that if he does start to get flights off the ground, starts to fly not that many migrants, but a few migrants to Rwanda, it could be a game changer in terms of the election? Because some of us just believe that the Prime Minister has been sort of visited by a kind of deranged obsession that if he gets at least one migrant to East Anglia...
East Anglia?
Well, that would be an idea, wouldn't it? East Anglia.
Coachloads.
Why not East Anglia? See, I've got a whole new policy that I think could work. No, if he gets just one migrant to East Africa, that somehow or other the British public will go, well, that's brilliant, that's solved the migrant crisis. I mean, do you think there is a bit of a fixation thing going on here, and he won't reap that many benefits just from getting a handful of migrants to East Africa?
I think what's behind this is what people really want to see is an end to the boats and an end to illegal immigration coming into this country. The Rwanda scheme is a part of that whole process. And actually, it was quite interesting during your news commentary, mentioning the fact that the boats are up 10% this year from the same period last year. Last year, I think we saw a 30 or 40% reduction in the number of boats. And I would wonder whether the slight increase, it reflects the fact that there's this problem going on with the Rwanda returns. So look, in itself, Rwanda is not the ultimate cure. It's not the silver bullet that's going to sort all this out. But what it is if you are somebody who is prepared to pay £10,000 to a people smuggler, where they're going to deposit you on the Dover beaches, and then somebody is going to come along and put you up in a 3-star hotel for the next 18 months. They're going to pay all your legal fees. And then at the end of it, you may end up with a job and a flat in the UK. £10,000 is a really, really cheap price to pay for what the people smugglers are potentially offering. If you disrupt that business model by saying that, if you're an Albanian, you're going to go straight back. If you're from anywhere else, you're going to end up in Rwanda. That £10,000 no longer looks like a good value for money. And the whole point behind this is that what we actually want is for no flights to go to Rwanda. We want the boats to stop because there's a risk of going to Rwanda. And that's when this whole scheme will have been 100% successful.
Well, listen, Mark, great to talk to you. And why don't you go back to Rishi and say you've got a good idea, the East Anglia deportation scheme. I think it could work. Thank you so much.
What I'm really worried about is 220,000 condoms and what happens when they've been used.
You see, an ecological issue.
2:30 on a Thursday.
Those Olympics are going to be a green nightmare. Great to talk to you, Mark. Thank you so much. Mark Garnier there.
Blimey, talk about burning rubber.